So I figure we'll go through this PowerPoint I've got here, go through the basics of how the whole system works, and then start to actually look at, we can use this room as an example, and then we'll can walk around and go through some of the more like specifics for how this building operates. So NX Distributed Intelligence, that's the name of the system. One thing to mention, you'll see Hubble Control Solutions. They just got bought by a new company, so it's now Current Lighting. So if you see current on things, that's why. So NX is a distributed intelligence system. Basically in every room, you have devices that will work on their own, and then they're also interfaced onto a network so that everything can communicate back to a central location. I'm going to run through this PowerPoint somewhat quickly, so if you have anywhere you want me to pause or you have questions, like feel free to just let me know. So let's see. So the area controller, I guess I'll do this. So the NX area controller, that's the main brain of the system. It's what interfaces the network down to all the rooms throughout the entire building. And that's going to be located in the electrical room, I think it's just on the other side of this wall. We'll check that out once we're done here.
There's only one for the whole building?
Yep, there's one for the entire network. And that's what it looks like. It's essentially just a Linux computer that's running Hubble software.
And when we're doing changes and things of that nature, that's what we plug in.
Yep. So and I'll run through how you can connect into that directly with your laptop. Not at this moment, but eventually it's going to be connected onto the school's whole building network, so that you should be able to log into it anywhere from like where you're connected into the school's network. So you'd be able to change schedules, turn things on and off.
So in other words, it's going to be plugged into
like the whole building network, yeah. So like where you would get your internet through, it'll be on that same.
Yeah. Well, we have the same exact system at our district office.
Yeah.
And they have a wire. It's plugged into your system, and that's the one we unplug when I hardwire into it. And because of security, they never activated that line. So every time I want to do a change, I can't do it remotely.
Okay.
I have to unplug that wire, plug my laptop in, and actually hardwire myself into the system.
So that's something to, I guess, to talk to your IT people about. They should have a way of kind of like quarantining this from the rest of the network and still like allowing you access through it. And
I'd love to. For the other reason, and now this is the second school we have.
Yeah,
and tie into it from remotely without having to go there and physically sit down.
So that should be possible. Definitely understandable with security concerns regarding that, but there should be ways to keep things secure on your network, but that's up to them.
Yeah.
So the lighting network itself, though, is its own physical network that's wired throughout the entire building, and this is what kind of bridges the two. All right, so actually I'll run through here. So these are just some notes on kind of the general features of what this will do. And also, by the way, I'll send over this PowerPoint to you guys if I take down your email after, so you can reference it. All right, so right over here is where the lighting network connects into the area controller. That has one cable that's going to what we call a PoE splitter. Not sure if I got a picture of it on here. Let's see. We'll see it when we walk around what the PoE splitter looks like. But essentially, there's one of those splitters for every sector of the building, and they jump together, and then from those splitters, they go out to the different runs, like home runs that go out through all the rooms for each section. Let's see. So this is kind of like a topology diagram. This doesn't actually show the PoE splitters on this diagram, but you would have like one of those PoE splitters here, and then chain together, and then that's when you would go out to your bridge modules, which are in each room, in each area of the building. Let's see. This is just kind of a general slide on how the system works. Not going to talk too much about it. We'll get into it when we talk about the specific rooms. So this is our network bridge. This is what takes your standalone room and its devices and then interfaces it onto the lighting network so that they can talk back to the area controller. So essentially, it's not a perfect explanation, but there's essentially one per room. Every classroom will have one. There'll be some areas where you might have multiple of them, like the different corridor sections. You might have a bridge for each area.
Sensor and your light harvester and all that stuff plug into this. And
No. So all this is doing is taking. So the next slide, I think, or down from here a little bit. Your room controller, that's what's actually taking in like the sensors and switches in the room, and then what has the relays and dimmers. So this is what's actually doing all the heavy lifting, if you will. Okay. And so yeah, there'll be one, if not more, of these per room. And then so back to the bridge, that's what plugs into the room controller and then creates the network. So you have all these bridges that chain together. You know, your network's snaking throughout all the rooms, and then they plug in down to that to one of the room controllers, so that room can then talk back all the way to the area controller. Let's see. So just to go over what these ports do, this is going to be really useful for troubleshooting the network. When you look at one of these bridges, you'll see there's the two ports that are close by to each other, and then this third one on the right. These two ports are the actual network ports, which they call the hub net, and so that's a daisy chain from bridge to bridge. They're both in and out, so it doesn't really matter which one you use for going through the daisy chain. They've got a green LED on here, and that lights up when the bridge is talking to the next bridge down, like on the end of that wire. So that's a really useful thing for troubleshooting the network. If you're seeing that you have some bridges offline, you would be going to look at the bridges themselves, and if you find one that doesn't have that green light on it, that's telling you right there that communication's not making it past that bridge for one reason or another. So yeah, so those two network ports, they each have one of those green lights. They also have red lights on them for these ports. That just means that it's getting power through the Cat5, so not too much of a concern there. This port over here, this is what goes to the actual room controller and uses when we'll get into the room controller, it'll plug into the FX port, not the smart port. Definitely something to know the difference about, which we'll get into. So this port has a red light right here, and that tells you that when that red light is lit up, it tells you that the bridge is talking to the room controller that it's plugged into. And then it's got this blue light here, and that blue light will do just a 1 second flash, and that indicates that the bridge has received a timestamp from the area controller. So if you see like one of these bridges and that blue light is either solid or off, that means that the bridge hasn't talked back to the room or the area controller in a couple hours. So it's saying it doesn't have that timestamp. So on a typical situation, you'll see two green lights on the bridge, red light here saying that you're talking to your room controller, and then a flashing blue light. So that's what you should expect to see on every bridge. Any questions on that? All right, so typical diagram. Now we'll talk about the room controllers. So there's a 2 relay, 2 dimmer, and then a 1 relay, 1 dimmer version, which is denoted by this 2RD or 1RD. Does anybody need an explanation on what relays or dimmers are for typical lighting or in 0 to 10 volt dimming? All familiar? That's good. So let's see if we got a better picture here. Yep, there we go. So you'll see this FX and SP. So these FX ports are used to connect in between the controllers. So that's what chains the controllers together. And then the SP ports are what takes in the switches and sensors. So it's important to know the difference between those two, because if you take a wire from this FX port and then go into an SP port on the other controller, it's not going to work. It's not going to talk to each other. So important to know that those FX ports are used for the communication between the controllers, SP ports to go out to the sensors and switches. We've also got these override buttons here. So on whether it's a 2 or 1 relay controller, you'll still have both of those buttons. If it's only a 1 relay, only your A button is actually going to do anything. You just click it, it'll turn the relay on and off. So that's a good way to see like what that controller is connected to, like what fixtures it's switching. If you hold the button down, it'll move the dimmer up and down. So then you can see what that dimmer output is controlling. Now, if you hold both of those buttons down for more than 8 seconds, you will factory reset the entire room. So be careful not to do that, or else you're going to wipe the programming out of the room, and it'll go back to its defaults. So over here, we got the diagram of all the wires you'll see coming out on the line voltage side of the controller. So you got your black, which is your line in, neutral for white. Red is your switch leg for relay 1. And then if you have a second relay in the controller, blue will be number 2. And then your 2 dimming outputs for a 2 RD controller. And then your common for both dimming outputs.
What's the voltage on those outputs?
So it's 0 to 10 volt dimming. So they're not actually outputting voltage. The way 0 to 10 works, the drivers and the fixtures are outputting 10 volts, and then these are syncing that voltage and lowering it down to a certain amount to tell the drivers you should be at this dimming level. So if they pull it down to 5 volts, then the lights are going to be at about 50% dimming. Any other thoughts or questions about the room controller?
Those outputs, those actually go to the relays?
No, the relays are inside the controller. So these are your line voltage, 100, or most of the lighting in here is 277. So that'll be actually switching your 277 on and off, going out to the fixtures. And then your dimming lines, telling the fixture where to dim to. So this is just that explanation of what I was talking about, the difference between the FX and SP ports. So not too much to worry about here. A lot of these devices we don't have out here. The only FX devices you'll be worried about are between the controllers and over to the bridge. All right.
So if you have to replace it, you have to reprogram, right?
Yeah, they'll have their programming on there. That is one thing where the area controller will come in handy, because there is a feature where if you take out a device and it can't talk to it anymore, and you right-click on it, it will ask you if you want to replace that device with another one. So it will automatically move the programming over to a new controller that you have discovered. Let's see. In fixture modules, these are the only place you're going to find these are in the parking lot poles, which are smart fixtures. They just have a dimming output that dims the light all the way down to off, and it's actually going to look like this, our low voltage fixture module. So that's going to be connected to the sensor that's in the fixture. You've got a motion and photocell and Bluetooth sensor all in one. And then that's also going to be connected to a radio module that allows all the fixtures to talk to each other and then back to the area controller. So this is a diagram of that, of what I was just talking about. So you'll have your sensor going into your fixture module, and this diagram doesn't show a radio, but you'd also have your radio module connected into that sensor. This device is the BTC time clock, or Bluetooth time clock, which looks like this. So you might be familiar with this from one of the other buildings. There's one that was, or I think a couple of them that were included, with the system, which Prairie should have to hand over to you all. So what this does is allow you to connect into the controllers so that you can discover and see what's going on in a room. Not sure if I have yeah, so I think later on, once we start talking about the phone app that you connect into this with, you'll be able to see more about what I'm talking about. But this is really useful for if you're having issues with a room, just plugging it in while you're in the room, so you can actually see what's going on instead of it allows you to just see a little bit more information about what you're looking at versus being at the area controller on the other side of the building or at home or whatever. So this can plug into essentially any open Cat5 port on the controllers or the switch. So you can plug it into a switch, or you can just plug it right into a controller. So yeah, we'll get into this a little bit more later. This is what your radio module will look like on the wireless fixtures outside. It creates a mesh network, so all the fixtures are talking to each other and back to the home radio, if you will, that's on the building. And it's like a smart mesh network, so you don't necessarily need line of sight to a fixture in order to talk to it. Like your communication can bounce around all the fixtures.
Those are on the fixtures.
Yeah, they'll be on the fixture themselves. I believe they're, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe they're sticking out the bottom of the fixture, kind of right next to the sensor. And those.
There's like a main. What was it?
And there's kind of the I guess we could call it the bridge radio. It's a radio that's connected into a controller, which is then connected to a bridge, which is on the network, so that it can talk back to the area controller. These actually haven't been set up yet. Working on that next week. So.
Where is that main controller?
So yeah, so this radio and controller are in the main gym. And then that radio itself is just mounted right outside on the exterior wall of the gym. Actually, there is also another one of these for the wrestling light in the gym that's on a hoist. So instead of using like a Cat5 spool and whatnot, it's just got a radio and a controller that's switching that light on and off. And then there's another radio attached to a controller with a switch in the gym, so that we can control that light wirelessly. All right, so I'm going to skip that and go to, let's see, this guy. So this is what we call an NXCI. It's a closure interface. There's only, I believe, one room that uses this, and it's for a partition sensor. Down in, I believe, Sector F, Level 1, there's a classroom that's it's 2 rooms that are divided by a partition that can open and close. So this device will take in that laser sensor that basically senses when the beam is cut, it separates the rooms so that they don't work together. And then when the beam can reflect back to itself, then it creates one zone out of the room so that both switches will control the entire room. So this shows like a setup if you had 3 different sections, but in that room we've actually only got 2. So you've got a set of room controllers in each room and a bridge in each room. And typically they would just work on their own, not talk to each other. But then when this device sees that the beam is reflecting back to itself.
Open, it's one big room.
Yep, and
The
then.
switches work like 3 ways. You control all the light from either switch.
Exactly.
When the wall's closed and the beam's broken, the switches turn into single poles for the individual rooms.
Yep.
Ingenious.
I think that's all I got. That's where the folding partition.
Yep. I believe you also have that set up over. All right. All right, let's see here. All right, next device we'll talk about is our motion sensors. So you got one right up there, and yeah, right over there. Those are the typical sensors you'll see in the classrooms. This other wall mount sensor you'll see in the stairwells. So let's see.
Oh, we do have some more wall mounts around?
Yeah, they're mostly in the stairwells, I believe. So these sensors, they actually have two different sensors on them. You've got the lens, which is infrared, and then the grate, which is ultrasonic.
Oh, the dual?
Yeah, so they're dual technology sensors. Each of these will have there's a green light right here in that little lens piece, and then a red light behind this lens. And those light up when each individual sensor is picking you up. So you'll probably see on that one, it might be a little too bright to see it easily, but if you wave your arm, you should see that green light turn on. So that's a kind of a quick troubleshooting thing to see if the sensor's even got power, if it's picking you up, and what's going on with it. So these, on their default setting, you have to trip both of those sensors for it to actually activate and tell the controller that there's occupancy in the room.
How do you change that? Is that through programming, or is that
So,
on the thing itself?
So it's on the sensor itself. So these sensors, they're not actually like digitally communicating to the controller. All that's happening is there is like a signal wire that lights up 24 volts when the sensor picks up or thinks the room is active, and then drops out to 0 volts when it thinks the room is unoccupied. And so behind this cover, and then on these, like the whole front cover pops off. There's a number of dip switches, and there's a cut sheet that specifies what all the dip switches
Is it on
do.
the cover, or?
I don't actually think it shows. So on the back side of the sensor, you have to actually like take it down, and then on the back side, I believe it shows like what the dip switches do. But yeah, so that just the ones that are going to be more useful to know are dip switch A2 will determine that high confidence or high sensitivity mode, which means that dip switch A2 is off. You have to trip both of the sensors for it to activate. If you turn that on, then just one or the other will activate it. So in some situations, you might find that the sensor's like kind of far away from
We have that
motion.
problem typically in all our schools. I don't see it happening here because we have two sensors and then 361. In a lot of our schools,
This room actually has two. Most of the classrooms only actually have one.
so 360.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, in most of our older schools, we have one. Most of the classes have one
In
that far corner from the. So in the morning when the teachers are by themselves,
Yeah.
and they all come out of the box, just like you said, they all come out of the box set for both.
Right,
And when the teacher's in the room by herself doing this in the morning, she gets put in the dark box. So we always have to go in there and go from the both to either.
Yeah. One thing to specify though, so it takes both of them to activate it, but one or the other will keep it active.
Strike or restrike.
Yeah, I guess you could say, yep. So A2 will change that setting. Then there's another bank of B dip switches. B3 and B4, when you turn those on, that will allow you to actually adjust the time and sensitivity manually through the dials. Because out of the box, those will be off, and they will be using this, what they call IntelliAdapt, self-adaptive time and sensitivity. Now, all of them, Prairie should be going through and setting them all to manual time for 20 minutes for the classrooms per the specifications. So that should be set up. Typically, though, we'll leave it on the self-adapting sensitivity so that it'll do its thing. There's a slide or two in here that kind of that explains sort of how that works. I'm not going to dive too much into it. This shows what the wiring will look like back to the controller. So you've got just your standard 3 wires, your common or ground, your 24-volt power, and then that actual control signal, which will be going back to your occupancy pin on this terminal block, which then takes Cat5 back to the controller. So a good point to mention here. So if you have 2 of these sensors, they're chained together, so they'll both work together to tell the sensor or tell the controller that the room is occupied. However, the controller is not going to know the difference of there being 1, 2, 5 sensors. All it's looking for is that voltage coming back on that terminal right there. So good thing to know. It will determine, though, if there's a sensor plugged into either of the smart ports, like those 2 SP ports. It can tell the difference between those 2. So you might see like 2 sensor inputs in some rooms. You might only see 1 in others. I think we got our photocells here next, which is that little guy up near the window. So this works kind of similar to the aux sensors in that it's not necessarily it's not digitally talking to the controller. It's just sending a voltage back on this yellow wire. So that this pin right here that's labeled PC, where'd my mouse go? There we go. So this PC pin, it's just reading the voltage coming back on there to determine how much light is coming in the windows. All right, so there's a diagram of what it might look like if you had a sensor and a photocell connected onto the same terminal block. All right, so we can talk about our switches now. Out here, you're going to find mostly 1 button, 6 button, and Orlo switches. Orlo stands for on, raise, lower, off. Orlo is essentially a 4-button switch that's pre-programmed for that on, raise, lower, off. I think it got a slide coming up here that shows one of those. It's in there somewhere. Let's see. Anyways, they have the buttons labeled, and that's an easy way to tell that it's Orlo. It'll say on the top, up arrow, down arrow, and then an off button. The Orlos, you can change what the on button does and what the off button does slightly, but they don't have the same amount of configurability as the 6-button and 1-button switches. On these 6 and 1 buttons, you can change exactly what each button does individually. And so those have been programmed to how the sequence of operation calls them out, which I guess I'll run through that right now. So this, for the 6 buttons in all the classrooms, the way those are going to work is the top button is on and off for all the lights in the room, just standard toggle. The second button activates your AV preset, which is actually what we've got going on right now in here, which is the row of lights in the front of the room totally off, and then the back row down to 25%. So you hit that button, it'll just activate that preset, and that's that. So if you want to get the lights back on, you got to hit the toggle button to turn everything back on. Moving down from there, these 2 buttons, 3 and 4, are going to be dimming up and down for the A section of lights. And then 5 and 6 are going to be dimming up and down for the B section of lights. So there's individual dimming control for either side of the room. 1-button switches. In all the corridors, those are set to be on only. So if you walk up to that button, or kids are walking through the hallways and hit the button, it's not going to do anything if the lights are already on. And same with the bathrooms, that's also the case. You may find there's a few one-off areas where there's closets or offices that have a 1 button, and those will turn the lights on and off if it's not a common space. These slides go through some of the other functions. These are some of the basic ones that I was just talking about. You've got like a timed on function if you want that to turn the lights back off. That's not being used anywhere right now. Some of the other functions here, I'll just leave that in the presentation if you want to check it out later. Here's an important thing to know, especially if you end up having a switch that you need to change out for a new one. They have this little address dial, which is behind the white cover. So anytime you have switches that are on the same chain, the same chain of Cat5, they have to have a different number set on this dial, or else the controller won't be able to see the difference between the switches. You've also got this little button here. If you hold that button down for 8 seconds, that's also going to do a factory reset of all the controllers that it's connected to in the room. So careful of that one as well.
Question real quick on the one button thing, like in the hallways and stuff, on only.
Right.
What if I wanted to turn those lights off? I assume that they're on a program. Like
Yeah,
they come
yep.
on, and they go off at a certain time.
Right.
And if they don't, or at night, if you wanted to, you could turn them on. What if you wanted to turn those lights off?
So that's so you wanted to shut off this corridor. The only way to do that during the day would be to either plug in your Bluetooth into the switch. You could take it out of the wall, plug the Bluetooth in, go into the override and shut off the relays, or go in through the area controller, find the relays and shut them off. But just to fill in what you were talking about with the program, they're set up to turn on at 6 a.m. and then the sensors are disabled until 8 p.m. So they won't shut off even if there's no motion in the hallways. So they're locked on 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then at 8 p.m. they start listening to the sensors.
Oh, okay.
And, yep. So if there's still people moving around, they'll stay on. If they're timed out, then they'll shut off. That's just so there's an Orlo switch, what I was talking about earlier, and there's just a little back view of what the switches look like. Plug in your Bluetooth if you got an open port. Let's see, we've got this touch screen. There's only one spot where you're going to find this. It's in one of the admin offices off of the Commons, and that is all that's doing is switching on and off the big MV sign that's on the side of the Commons. So it's just a override switch for that. Next to that, you'll also find 2 Orlo switches. One of them is for the room that it's in. Another one is for all the common space. So that is kind of one exception to like the common areas or circulation areas where you are actually able to turn it off because you got this Orlo switch instead of a 1 button. Let's see. So this goes through how to change the settings on this touchscreen, which I'm not going to dive too much into. It's already set up, working, so I'm not going to worry about that. It does also cover if you wanted to put a custom logo on there and go, if you have some kind of logo that you want to replace this with, you are able to, or add a password to it. That's also an option. Let's see. All right, next we got our relay panels. So I don't know if exactly off the top of my head, I want to say there's around 20 relay panels throughout the whole building. These are being used to control the plug load circuits in all the classrooms and a lot of the offices. I think there's one small exception where there's one of the panels that's doing some exterior signage as well as all the plug loads. This is probably a little different from that other building where I believe they're using the actual room controllers to switch the controlled outlets instead of a relay panel. So these are interfaced onto the network through this card right here, which I believe we got another slide. Yep, so this is a little bit of a closer view. So what this is zoomed in on is this card right here in the panel. So these are your 2 network ports. they've got that green light similar to the bridge that tells you that it's talking to the other end of that wire. You should see this red LED doing a 1 hertz flash. That's telling you that panel's operating normally as it should. And then you've got 2 solid green lights that also indicate normal operation. And actually, yeah, one thing I didn't mention about the bridges and about this LED is that LED will flash when there's messages going through that port. So it's normal to see those LEDs just kind of flickering and going on and off. The panels have low voltage inputs for photocells and aux sensors and low voltage switches. They're not being used anywhere here, but just something to know that is an option. That's what this little terminal is on each of the relays. And those can be set up to work just how any of the aux sensors or photocells work in case there's something maybe added in the future. You do have that option. Let's see. All right, so talk a little bit about, this is getting a little more into the software side of how things work. So when you have a network, every single device on the network will have an area, a zone, and a group. I'll try and find this, so this diagram kind of shows it well. So an area consists of zones, and a zone consists of groups, and that separates out all the devices from talking to each other on the network. So just an interesting point, if you have a switch that's in group 1, zone 29, area 10, it's going to have that information programmed into the switch. So if you take that switch, so say you take this switch out of the classroom, plug it in all the way on the other side of the building, it's still going to control this room because all the relays and controllers are set to that same area, zone, and group. So it's just a good concept to understand of how everything's talking to each other and working together.
Good way to mess with people, I guess. Come here at night and just move all the switches around.
Yeah. Yep. No comment. So this gets set up in the area controller, and we'll dive into that a little bit once we go into the electrical room and connect into it. I'll give you a little overview of what that looks like. Let's see. So typically a zone is typically you're gonna have a zone per room. There's some situations where you might have like this whole corridor here is in one zone, even though there's multiple bridges. So you can program multiple devices into the same zone so that they talk to each other, even though they're not physically connected to each other under a bridge. So another example, that commons area, that big MV sign on the side of the wall, that's on its own bridge and controller. And then the lights that are high up on the ceiling, those are on their own bridge and controller, but they're working together because they're programmed into the same zone. You'll find that in the stairwells as well. That's another common area where all 3 levels are programmed into the same zone. And kind of a feature of that is so if you trip one of the sensors in the first floor, it's going to tell all 3 floors to turn on because they're programmed into the same group, zone, and area. So next, this starts to get into how to connect into the controller from your laptop, which I believe you're familiar with if you don't have it connected into the building network. I'm just going to kind of blow through this because I'll actually show you once we walk over into the electrical room, show you how it works on my computer. But you'll have this for reference if you need to look back on it. One of the keys, just the keys of doing that is you have to change your IP address on your computer to match the IP address or the subnet of the area controller so that they can communicate to each other. Got your login here for the area controller. Username is admin and password nextgen.1. You do have the option to change change those logins once you get into the controller. Definitely do ask if you change this admin password to communicate that back to Hubble, or at least myself, so that if one of us shows up here to help fix something or for whatever reason, we're not locked out of the system.
Question, now if this is plugged into the system, plugged into the net,
Mm-hmm.
does it get like updates and stuff like that from Hubble or whatever? Like time, date updates?
No, yeah, and that's probably getting more into the kind of the security side of things. Like it's not made to do that. It doesn't like talk back to Hubble's servers or anything like that.
I know every time I tie into this at district office, I always have to update the time. It always, it's 10 minutes off or something like that. I was wondering if I get that line ever heated up, would that
I think that would actually grab the time.
Would it grab the time from outer space?
Yeah, yeah, I believe it would. I'm not actually 100% sure about that, but I believe that's what would happen. Let's see. All right, so here's a couple slides on the mobile app on your phone. So if you want to go ahead and download it, we can play with it right now. I can just show it to you on my phone. It's called Control Hub. You'll find it in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store for Android. So this allows you to connect to the Bluetooth device, the Bluetooth dongle, or the Bluetooth sensors that are in the individual fixtures in the parking lot. It's called Control Hub. Yeah, I'll leave that up. So I'm going to go ahead and actually pop one of these switches out of the wall so we can start looking at how that works.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. While this is being verified, please leave the building by the nearest exit or exit stairway. Do not use the elevators. May I have your attention, please? May I have...
I have it, I didn't know. I must have been the other one.
So just a quick point about the Bluetooth devices. If you have a phone connected to them, it won't show up on any other phones. So you have to disconnect from it in order to connect a different phone. Yeah, yep. The Bluetooth, that Bluetooth device has a little blue light on it. It'll flash when it's waiting for a connection. It'll go solid when it's connected to a phone. So let's see. So this screen is what you'll see when you're searching for the Bluetooth devices. It'll sort them by signal strength. So most of the time you're not going to pick up the ones that are outside unless you're standing like right under them. Sometimes you might see them pop up, but typically you're just going to find the one that's plugged in right next to you. So I went ahead and connected into that one. In case for whatever reason you are having trouble figuring out which one is which, the number that pops up here is shown on the sticker on the Bluetooth device. Let's see. So once you connect in, so I think from here I'll actually just show you on my phone itself, give you a better idea of what's going on. So this is the room we're standing in. We've got the bridge discovered. We've got 3 room controllers. Within those 3 room controllers, we have 6 relays and 6 dimmers. We've got 3 switches showing up in here, which actually I believe there's only 2. Well, no, there are 3.
6 dimmers.
So yeah, once I'll just talk about this for a second, then we'll talk about kind of how the typical classrooms all work together. So switches, and then you got your aux sensor inputs and your photocell inputs. And then the last thing is the Bluetooth device itself, which there's not really much to look at there. So I'll go into the bridge real quick. This just shows you what area and zone it's programmed into, what the bridge is labeled, and then it allows you to change the area and zone, which you shouldn't really need to mess with. One thing to know about this, if you have, say you put a new switch in, it's going to come out of the box on area 1, zone 1. So if you go into this bridge page and you hit set area and zone, that will take the area and zone and send it down to all the devices that are in the room. So it never really hurts to hit that button. If you're adding devices, or if you go into one of the relays and you find for one reason or another it's set on area 1, zone 1,
You can plug in a new switch, and
that'll set it to the area and zone of this room. Yep,
Gotcha.
so that'll start working with these devices. It'll also, in all these pages, it'll show you what the MAC address is of the device. The bridge has their own MAC address. The controllers have their own MAC address. The switches grab the MAC address of the controller based on the port that they're plugged into. So I'll go into this room controllers page. This will show all the controllers that are in the room. A little more info, the MAC address, the firmware version that it's on. If you actually go into the individual controller, it will give you an override for the lights, so I can turn that on and off, dim it up and down. So this is just to kind of see what the controller is doing. It's not the settings for the relays and dimmers. That's going to be in your relays and dimmers section. So this is where I'd actually be able to go and change how the relays and dimmers work. Some of the typical things you might be concerned with are the occupancy mode. That determines if it turns on automatically with the sensor or if you have to use the switch. So all your classrooms are on vacancy per Washington Energy Code. So you got to use the switch to turn them on. At the bottom, you'll see what group they're in. So that's another useful thing. This relay is in group 3, so that's going to correspond to how the buttons are programmed. So that relay will listen to any buttons that are programmed to group 3, any sensors that are programmed to group 3, and same with the photocells. So I'll go into the switches real quick, give that a quick overview. So we've got 3 6-button switches in here. They're all set up to do the same thing. You'll see it's got address 1, 2, and 4. That's showing what that little dial is set on. If you have them set on the same address, it just kind of creates like a undetermined state. Like you might see one of the switches show up, you might see none of them show up. It just kind of causes some issues for the controller to be able to talk to it. So I'll go into this 6-button switch. So this is where you'll see the programming I was talking about before, where you've got your toggle.
Those are your 6 buttons.
Yep, those are your 6 buttons. So that first one is toggling the groups. Second one is set to the preset that sets your AV setting. Then we got raise for the one zone, lower for the other, and so forth. Let's see. So let's talk about the typical setup of all the classrooms. You've got 6 individual zones. You've got 2 switch legs, if you will, so your A and B, but then those are divided up into daylight zone 1, daylight zone 2, non-daylight zone. So 6 individual control legs. That's why you got the 3 controllers with 2 relays each. And so the way those are programmed with the groups, it goes, the A side is going to be 1, 2, and 3 for daylight zone 1, 2, non-daylight zone, and B is going to be 4, 5, and 6. So that's typical through all the classrooms. So you'll find, didn't talk about the photocells yet. You'll find the occupancy sensors are just going to be in all the groups. That's by default. And so that, they'll just control everything in the room, which is what you want. The daylight sensors, however, so per daylight sensor input, you'll have 6 zones that you can individually tell it how to control and like calibrate. All the classrooms are just using the 2 zones. You got daylight zone 1, daylight zone 2. So zone 1 is going to be talking to group 1 and group 4. Zone 2 is going to be talking to group 2 and group 5. So that, these 2 lights are going to dim the same based on the photocell, and those front 2 are going to dim the same based on the photocell. In this page, this is your photocell calibration, and this determines how much the lights dim based on how much light the photocell is picking up. So in this room, for example, we've got our design and our task at 50. The easy way to think about this is the design and task create a ratio that then gets multiplied by the sensor value. So if your design and task are at the same number, then they cancel out of the equation. The ratio is 1. So it's just 1 times whatever your at sensor value is, then I guess divided by how much the photocell is picking up. So if I go back here, I can see that the daylight level there, 220, so that photocell is picking up quite a bit of light in there. This zone 1 is programmed at 120 at the sensor. So what that means is once the sensor hits 120, the lights are going to be at 1%. If the sensor was at 60, they'd be at 50%. Make sense? So if you wanted, if for some reason you're seeing that we want these lights to be brighter, you want to raise up that sensor value so it takes more light for them to dim down, and vice versa. If you want it to dim more, lower the sensor value, and then they'll dim with less light at the sensor. You'll see in zone 2, it's set up the same way, design at 50, sensor at 120, except your at task is at 25. So that's creating a ratio at the design level and basically saying that these secondary zone lights are going to be twice as bright as the first zone. And then, same thing with that sensor value. So typically keep the sensor value the same on zone 1 and 2, so that they're, following each other twice as bright in the second zone. Anything not making sense about that? Any questions or comments? Another point about the app, anytime you're in one of those pages, you have to hit save at the top for it to actually send the settings. So if you're messing around with things and you are like, oh, I don't know what I just did, I'm not sure, just go back, don't hit save, go back, and then you won't have actually changed anything. Another useful thing in here on the app in the bottom right, or bottom left, we've got the override, which you can determine what groups the override is affecting, turn the entire room on and off, dim it up and down.
That override the light sensor? I didn't notice.
So actually, that's what I was going to say next. That photocell will, whatever the level the photocell sets, you cannot put the dimmer above that. Even through the override, through the switches, through the area controller, like no matter what you do, it's not going to go above that. So let's see here. You can also look at schedules through the app. Typically, you'd want to do that through the area controller. It's a little more user-friendly, but you can see it through there. You can also see what the time that the controller has is if you're questioning that.
The time of the controller or the preset times?
Just like what time the controller thinks it is.
Oh, okay.
If you're,
Current time.
yeah.
Could you change it on the app or?
You could, but then about 5 minutes later, when the area controller sends out a timestamp, it's just going to go back to what the area controller says. So really, the area controller is like the master time clock. Let's see.
If you want to correct the time, you have to go there and do it.
Yeah, yep. If they're disconnected from the network for some reason, then it would just keep whatever you put through here. But they should keep their time, even without the area controller, they should keep their time even through a power loss. Like they've got a backup battery inside that we'll at least keep the time clock going. Let's see. So I think that's all we've got to go through for the app. I think we're just about ready to start walking around. Let's see, make sure there's no other slides I didn't want to cover here. Yeah, that does it. So figure we can start in the electrical room, do a quick overview of the area controller, and then just take a tour of the building.
Like in this room, where would all the devices be?
So I think they're somewhere in the middle. I haven't actually been,
Not typical
to the
setup.
to the
I know, like in
devices
the old
themselves.
stuff, when switches used to have wires going to them, they always set it up above the switch by the door.
Yeah, that would be a better question for someone with Prairie. That actually. Yeah.
Were you up there like troubleshooting?
In the classrooms, not so much. There's a few like more one-off things.
There's a specific color.
How do all those lights up there?
I think they've typically used green. Oh yeah, looks like there is something up here. So that blue one, that you can see, that's going to be your bridge for this room.
So that'd be a bridge too. Yeah.
And then, it looks like there's actually.
Lighting, that one says lighting, that one says emergency lighting, there's a lot of stuff right there.
So that might actually be a bridge and controller for the hallway or like the display case or something. But yeah, it looks like that's going to be for this room because we got the 3 controllers and then the bridge. One thing you can do also, I don't, if you can hear decently well, you can hear them going on and off.
He goes, when he turned the lights on before, I heard something click up here.
Yeah. It's something I actually use like when we were trying to find some of the devices, and through the area controller you can set them to wink, and they'll just go on and off continuously. And so I'm walking around trying to hear like where they were at. Yeah.
You go to the electrical room?
Yeah, I think we'll head over there. All right. Actually, I'll just probably go ahead and.
Spare switches on site? Where do we get those
That
from?
would be a better question for Prairie.
Okay,
I'm
go through Prairie.
not sure. Yeah. I do know there's actually I know actually right now
Have
there's.
you had any get broken? Well, not at ASC.
At district office, yeah, usually the people at district office are a little bit lighter on stuff than the high schools. But,
Why East is a whole other story.
Oh, actually, so here's something I didn't mention about the app that's useful, is you can clone the settings off of devices. So if I connect into the switch, I can clone this switch, and then if you got a new one for another classroom, that's a cookie cutter classroom, you can take that cloning and load it onto the new switch. So you don't have to worry about figuring out what the groups are and this and that. Like just copy and paste it essentially. You do have to still set the area and zone, but all the other settings will copy over on that cloning feature.
something Prairie's gonna have to do, I noticed you mentioned before that all those buttons were gonna be marked.
Yeah,
don't see anything.
I think that's something that they're that they'll do down the road. I'm pretty sure the order was put in for all those engraved buttons. But yeah, that's.
Oh, it's not gonna be a little sticker that actually an
I
engraved button?
believe so. Yeah, I believe
So
they
that
have.
plate's gonna pop off, and put a new plate?
Yep. So
They had to
this,
swap them all out of Heritage.
so that comes right off, and you can just pull the button right out
Oh, okay, gotcha.
and replace it. Yep. Oops. All right, so let's see here. Let's see what's going on with that.
Is there switched outlets in here?
Believe so, yeah. Actually, a good point on those is the switches.
Yeah, they're marked.
The switches won't control the outlets, only the sensors. And since the relay panels are across the network, you got to have that network communication for that to work. So if you get a classroom that's like way down the line from the panel, and somehow maybe a circuit's off, or something, you know, a wire got cut, then, you know, the sensor signal's not going to make it back to the panel to tell it to turn those circuits on.
Those so they fall off.
They'll just stay. They'll just stay in whatever state they're
they
in.
were in.
Yeah, yep.
Office, it's spun this way. The balance is on the bottom, the little pluggy thing is up here.
This is right side up.
Ah, so they put that one in backwards
The
over
other
there,
one must
huh?
be upside down. Yep.
That one's upside down.
So you'll,
Bypass switches?
yeah, those are going to be exterior overhead
Nice.
switches. Yep.
Yeah, that's something I wish they would have did over at the district office, was they had to do some stuff, we had to do it through, there was a, this, and then there's another cabinet that's like this but bigger.
Yep.
And there was
Yeah,
a-
so this,
there was an override button we figured out we had to press.
Yep, these little guys.
Yeah, that one.
Yep. So, yeah, I guess I didn't mention that. That's something good to know. You can manually switch the relays just through that button.
Oh,
Yep,
Yeah.
so like
For
right up
parking
here.
lot lights.
Every board, yeah, we had to do it for the parking lot lights, because there were two of them that were burnt out, and the contractor was there, and that's how we did it. Was we didn't have these over at district office.
Let's see. So we're unplugged in here.
All of them?
What's that?
Yeah, that will. This they're not. I haven't fully set them up yet, but they will. They should control everything on the exterior on both of them.
Like, what's one building, one.
I don't know. I don't actually know why they put two there. As far as they're going to be
That's why I was
programmed.
thinking maybe one's for all the building lights, or one's for all the pole lights, or something like that, maybe?
That's probably a good way to do it. I haven't seen any like specification that says what one or the other should do. So I could very well set that up. Parking lot, building. So
Fine.
yeah.
We'll
So
find- maybe we'll go get little buttons with the
yeah.
say pole lights or something.
All right, so, you know, this is the area controller that we saw. This is your main network coming in here. I'm plugged into this port, which will, if you have it connected to the building network, that's where you're going to connect in.
Then you should see the blinky lights on the side, right?
Yep, that tells you that there's communication going through the port. So let's see here. Plug into my laptop. You know, a lot of laptops these days don't come with Cat 5 ports, so it is something to think about.
I have one, and it's dead. So the IT guy said, "Get me a new laptop." He gave me this little friggin' dongle thing,
Yep.
where it goes from Ethernet to USB.
All right, so I'm going to run through the process of how you set your IP address so that you can talk to the controller. Easiest way is to go down to this little network icon in Windows, go to your network and internet settings, come over here to Ethernet, and go to change adapter options. And that's going to bring up this window. And this window will show all your network adapters in your computer. So you want to find your Ethernet adapter that you're plugged into. Right click that and go to the properties, which does take administrator. You have to be an administrator on your computer, so as long as you got that, then you'll go into the Internet Protocol version 4, so IPv4.
Same as cameras.
Yep. So we'll double click that, and then we're going to use a manual IP address. So the IP address of the controller currently, which could change down the road if it gets set up for the network, but the default is 192.168.1.1. So I have my computer set to 192.168.1.2. You don't want them to be the same, or else they're going to collide. And then subnet mask is just the default will do 255.255.255.0. Hit OK, hit OK. And then you'll go over to your browser. Google Chrome is recommended. Things will typically work on like Firefox or Internet Explorer, but Chrome is the recommended browser. So then we'll go to the IP address of the controller, right in your browser bar, 192.168.1.1. Hit enter, and there's your login screen. Password that I mentioned before, admin, and then nextgen.1 with a capital N. So log in. And this is going to bring you to kind of the splash page. Sit down for a second here. All right, so let's make this a little bigger. All right, so this is all our different areas. So we had our area, zone, and group. So we've got an area for each sector. Sector C is actually split into two because there's so many rooms on each level. Figured that would make it a little more organized. So you got these little drop-down arrows that'll expand out to show you all the zones in that area. We've got an area for the exterior as well. So you can expand all these. You'll see in Sector F, we've got a bunch of classrooms. Sector G as well, restrooms, so forth. Once you expand the zone, so I'll just do this classroom for example, that'll show you all the bridges, which is going to be this device that has the actual drop down, and then the relays and the panels that have been loaded into that zone. So here's, you can go into the bridge, you'll see all the controllers, you'll get the container for the controller, which just shows you the overrides, and then below that you'll see the actual dimmers and relay outputs that have all the settings, which are going to be the same thing that you'll see on the app, just laid out a little differently. So you'll see the way they're labeled. We have A and B and the different daylight zones. So this is, you see A comma B because that controller is doing A and B, daylight zone 1. And since it's A first and B second, that means the first relay is going to be A and the second relay is going to be B. So you'll see AB dim 1, that means you're looking at A. If you see AB dim 2, that means you're looking at B. Same thing with the relays. So like relay 1, that's going to be A. Relay 2, that's going to be B. In some classrooms, they connected them the other way around. So you'll see it'll be labeled BA. So relay 1 will be B, relay 2 will be A. Then you got your aux sensor, photocell switch, just the same as the app. Same settings, just a little bit different view. And then all your relays in the panel, you'll see those are in group 16 on occupancy mode. So they'll listen to the occupancy sensors and just turn on without any interaction with the switch. Let's see, there's don't believe there's not any schedules going on with the classrooms. So I'm going to go to the circulation, one of the circulation areas for an example here. So this is Sector C, Level 2 circulation area. You see we got 3 bridges that are all programmed into this zone. So that means they're all working together. They're using the same 16 groups to separate things out. Like I was talking about earlier, in all the circulation areas and stairwells, we've got the motion sensors disabled from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And so that's here in the occupancy sensor active times. You'll see it's active from close to open. And so what that's referring to is, I'm going to go to a different page here. In our system setup screen, we've got open and close times, which are set for 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. And so what that does is, right. So let me pull that up here. So it's under our general settings, open and close times. So Monday, 6 a.m., 8 p.m., and through Friday. So what that does is a bunch of the schedules and sensors are referencing your open and close times instead of just having a direct time set in there. So that makes it so that if you wanted all the corridors to kick on at 7 a.m. instead of 6 a.m., you come here and change the time. Instead of having to go through every single individual zone and go and change it, you can change it all just from this one spot. There is some caveats to that though. So those circulation areas are set up that way to use the open and close times. One caveat is all the display cases. So you see like right on the outside of this hallway, they got trophy cases, and those are kind of scattered out throughout. Those are programmed to turn on at 4 p.m. and off at 11 p.m. And then they also have a switch inside of them. But those, there's to Orlo. So you got you got it on off and then the dimming.
So you can turn it off during that time frame if you wanted to.
Yeah, or
Or
if it's
during the day if you want to turn it
yeah.
on. Because it sounds like it's on night. It's only
Right, 4 p.m. to 11, Monday through Friday.
So if you want sunlight during the day to show off.
Or during, on the weekend or something, yeah. So let me find one of those. So you'll see for that, so I'm on one of the zones for where is this? Sector F, second floor display case. So this schedule, instead of referencing the close time, it's just using a normal time, 11 p.m. So if you wanted to change those, you would have to actually go through each individual zone and each individual schedule and change that for all the different display cases. Let's see. What else can we look through here? So one thing I didn't cover in the PowerPoint, there's a bunch of individual restrooms. You've got the girls and boys, and then there's like a small restroom in the middle of them. Those are using a aux sensor that's built into a switch. And so the way that works, there's no digital like one button or Orlo or anything. It's just an aux sensor that's wired back to the controller, similar to like the ones on the ceiling. And so the way that looks, you don't actually see it as a switch through the system because it's wired in as an occupancy sensor. So those rooms, like they're all labeled like RR, whatever the number is, RR200E. So you'll see on here, this one, there's no switch in there. There's just only the aux sensor input, which is that switch itself. So those are all set up to work on occupancy, so that when that switch goes active and sends the signal back, it kicks on the lights.
And it goes off at a predetermined
right, it's
10 minutes or 20 minutes or something.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. So yeah, that's gonna be the gist of your schedules. The exterior.
So I was going to ask you, what's going on with the outside?
Yeah, so the exterior zones, there's a zone per sector on the exterior, and then a zone for all the parking lot poles.
Oh.
And it's kind of actually up in the air right now. I don't know for sure whether they're going to take that building connection and then do that scheduling through like a building management system, or if we're just going to keep the scheduling that I've got programmed through this controller. So right now it's all scheduled through here. So you could go into each individual zone, and you'll see. So like for Sector E, for example, go down to the schedule. We've got on at sunset, off at midnight, on at 4 a.m., off at sunrise. So you got that big chunk in the middle of the night where everything's off. Yeah.
That's gonna change.
But Ellsworth didn't, after a few weeks it stopped working.
Yeah.
Have to physically.
Yeah, we have what they call the district standard, which is on at 4:30, off at sunrise, minus 30, I think, and then on again at sunset, plus 30, and then off at midnight.
Right.
7 days a week, 5 schools.
Yeah. So that stuff, if it needs to be changed, it can be changed. Just following the prints.
Yep.
So each individual zone on the exterior has its own set of schedules.
So we have so when you say zone, every building has their own.
Yeah, so like Sector A and B is one zone, Sector C is one, Sector E, F
Is
and
there a
G.
map in
And then.
Not built
and then-
into this,
And
no.
and all the pole lights.
Yeah, and then
So
that'll be
we
it.
had, because that's why I asked outside lights, we always have to mess with the outside lights. We had to do it at district office, there's some kind of issue, and they wanna keep the lights on all night. So I'd have to go to each individual zone for the buildings,
Yeah, and you'd
and
have
then
to.
the parking lot,
Right.
to make changes.
yep,
Like I
yep.
wanna keep them on all night, so there'd be like 5 different changes I
Right.
have to make.
Yeah, yep. So yes, like what I would do if you didn't want them to turn them off at midnight, I wouldn't delete the schedule. I would just change the action to be none.
That's what, well, at district office, they wanted to make a change, I guess there was some security stuff. So they want, you know what, we want to keep the lights on all night. So I went into the program, I'm like, well, I can just delete these times and just leave sunrise and sunset.
Yeah.
And I was just getting ready to hit the delete button, I went, wait a minute, how do you add a schedule? And I was figuring around, like, I don't know how to add a schedule. I'm like, I'm not gonna delete anything, so I just went in there and I turned off those 2 groups.
Yep, that'll also do it.
On the
Yeah.
times, and just left it for sunrise and sunset,
Yeah.
and walked away.
So that'll do it. But yeah, just so you do know, to add a schedule, just right click on schedules, and then hit add schedule, and that'll bring up another one for you.
Oh, the old right click, yeah, what about the old right click thing? Yeah, I always hesitate when it comes, when I hit that delete button, I'm like, if I delete it, I'm never gonna be able to put it back again.
So if you
Take
put
that
now, you said, then it's gonna be all turned on, or just whatever you wanna do after, like turn on or off?
You have to override then, right?
Yeah.
Right, like if you wanted to turn them on during the day, yeah, you either come over to that switch, or you could go into the groups tab under the zone. This one's split up into 2 groups. You know, they'll be different per zone, but you could click the group, and then it'll give you an override on this
Yeah,
next
if you want
screen.
to, instead of coming back, let's say you want to do it for an extended amount of time, you want it 24 hours a day. You could do this or that, and it'll do it for 1 day, but then the next schedule comes around, it'll change again. But if you go here and take all the offs, just
Right.
unhighlight all the offs and just leave the on for midnight, then it'll just stay on 24 hours.
Yep, you got it. Yep, here's that screen. You know, you could go to group 1. That'll turn everything in this group 1 in this zone on or off. Quick thing just about this in general, you have these bridges here. You know, when you click on them, so there's an example. This bridge is not talking back to the area controller right now. It's because I have the cables unplugged. So that'll highlight that red if it can't actually talk to the device. And so that's just a good thing to know. You know, if you come in here and click these and it's not actually talking to them, and then you try and save the schedule, it's not actually going to like reach the device. So let's see. Trying to think of any other kind of oddities or ins and outs. Let's see. Yeah, I think unless you guys got any more questions here, we start walking around. We can check out the PoE switches and just go through some more of the spaces. Close this up. Oh, one other thing. If you add a device onto the network, you plug in a switch, add a controller. If you move a switch to a different port, it'll think it's on it'll think it's a new switch. So, adding devices, you have to come up here and hit discover, and that will basically the area controller will send out a message to all the bridges and say, start telling me if you have new devices on you. And it will take a little while. It's such a big network that even if you don't add any new devices, it'll take like 20 minutes for it to go through and scan like the entire building, which it's very dependent just on how many devices you got in the network. You'll see, and then those will pop up down here in your uncommissioned devices. So expand this. So this has got all the relay panels. It keeps those in there just as a container. All the relays are commissioned. But say you added another relay into one of those slots, then you'd want to come in here and hit discover, and then you should be able to find it under the relay section in that panel. Here's an example. This is like one of the last things I had to add into the network, one of the stairwell controllers. So actually I'll show you kind of how that process works since I got this right here. So before we started the training, I hit discover. This controller hadn't been commissioned onto its area and zone yet, so it's showing up here down on the list. So I'm going to click the bridge, and then I'm going to select what normally, so there's already a few devices that are under this bridge in the zone, so it's not letting me change it. But normally it would give you the whole list of all the areas, and then once you select the area, it'll give you the list of all the zones. And that's if it's a bridge that hasn't been put into any area or zone yet. Since this bridge has already been put into that zone, it's just locking it into that one. So just go ahead and hit save, and that's going to put the area and zone settings down to those relays and occupancy sensors for that stairwell. And I'm just going to take a second to set the programming on that so I don't forget. Let's see, so I'm going to go stair 11. I'm going to set the close to open. Oh, looks like I already got that in there. Those little red dots that you see, so they just went away. Those little red dots show up when it's working on setting the area and zone. So that usually just takes 30 seconds or so. So yeah, I'm all set up now. All good there. So got my schedule on that stairwell that's turning the lights on at open, and then in the aux sensors I got them disabled throughout the day. So that's the typical setup in the stairwells there. So yeah, let's check out, walking around, check out those PoE switches. I guess we can do just kind of a full walkthrough. We'll stop by each PoE switch so you know where they're at, and then just kind of point out some other things while we're on our way around. Something you all should be receiving, like once the project's like totally done, is the as-built drawing that I've been keeping up as we're going through commissioning everything. I'll give you a little preview of it here. So it's all the drawings with the highlighting is just something that I'm using to keep track of things for myself, but go to like A or B level 1, for example. So this is B level 1. The electrical room, we're standing in this hallway right here. So the drawings shows there's a bridge in there connected to some controllers that are switching exterior lights. Shows that controller is connected to those two switches. Classroom, for example, you've got the bridge, which is chaining on the network, then going down to the 3 controllers. Controllers are connected to the sensors and the switches and the photocell there. And so this is the controls design for the whole building, so definitely a helpful reference to have. There is the indication of the PoE switch. So it's actually in that MDF over there. So we'll go check that out. Right there.
Wow.
That's your PoE switch. These being unplugged, that's why those bridges weren't showing up a second ago. So I'm actually done with what I was doing, so I'm going to plug these all back in. Let's see. There are LEDs on the ports, which might be able to kind of see in the reflection here. and they're orange LEDs. They'll just light up when when it's talking to something on the other end of that wire. So another good point of troubleshooting. If you see any of those lights are not lighting up when they got a wire plugged in, then there's something going on with that cable.
How many of those are there throughout the campus?
So it's in that drawing. Like I put a little note. There's one. So there's one for sector A and B, one for C, one for E, one for D, and one for H, one for F and G. So 7. So not too many. But then they each have a certain number of home runs going out through each section. So total number of like home runs, is probably 30 or 40, something like that. So yeah, we'll stop by each one of these throughout the whole building and touch on some other details while we're walking around. Here's one of the display cases, trophy cases. You got this Orlo switch. So, yep, that switch works.
Nice.
And you'll notice also if you hit the on button, it'll put it back up to 100.
And you can't hold the down button.
You can hold them. You can hold them or tap them. Nice and smooth, yeah. And that is a setting that you can change. It's actually on the faster end, believe it or not, the way they're set up. But let's see here. Just real quick, I guess in the gym, that I actually can't even quite see it from here, but there's that wrestling light is up in the center there. That's on the hoist.
I see the hoist right
Yep,
there.
yep. And so that in the back right corner is where the switch is for that, and then also the bridges and radio for the exterior parking lots lights. Yep. There's a closet back there on the right.
Oh, gotcha.
Yep. And so there's the radio's mounted on the exterior there. So like even though the radio is mounted on the outside of that wall, it's going to talk to those poles, and the messages are going to bounce all the way around.
Pole to
like
pole,
yep,
kinda
all
like
the way.
extenders.
Yep. Yeah. Call it the mesh network. So.
How
Yeah.
are these lights going off? Is that part of us or
There's
or is that something else?
a switch right here.
Oh, there it is.
Yep.
Same thing, six button.
The gyms are slightly different, I believe. I'd have to actually look. I didn't actually set up these rooms myself, but I think there are a number of rooms that have 2 switch legs that aren't classrooms. And the way those will work is instead of that second button being like the AV preset, it's just a second like toggle on and off. So
So the first button
turn
turned
on all the lights?
The first button turned on the square ones. The second button turns on the can lights.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. And you'll find that like there's a couple conference rooms where there's just 2 switch legs, and so it's just like A and B on and off on the first 2, and then
Where's all the relays and stuff in here?
there's a closet in the back
okay.
corner over there.
Right up there.
Yep. Yeah.
You never know, right there.
Yeah.
You will figure out.
So, so the 2 of those wires on every PoE, except for the last one in the run, are going to be the one from the previous PoE switch, and then to the next PoE switch, and then the rest will be out to the sector that it's for.
One of them panels.
Yep, there's a 48 relay that's not quite filled up, but yeah, you see there's a couple of them are on right now.
Those all have manual buttons in them as well?
Yep, you got your little overrides on there.
That's good.
And yeah, typical lights that you should expect to see, that flashing red, 2 solid greens, and network has got some messages going through it. I think we can head down to Sector E. Our PoE switch for Sector E in here is MDF. Right over here. This one I got separated out, so these are the two that are going to the.
One's a line in, one's a line out.
Yeah,
Is it
and
daisy chain?
they're all labeled on the wire down there. So this is going out to the Sector D PoE switch, coming in.
That's the next one in line.
Yeah, from the Sector C, and then the 3 runs, level 1, 2, and 3. So yeah, that's that. We can, I guess, head over to D and H. Level 1 and level 2 for the home runs.
So there's label on it, H?
They're not labeled because.
Oh, you're in building H.
Yeah.
Don't you know who you are, Alex? You're building H. Right here.
They do say, actually, like these ones actually, they do say H level 1, H level 2, and then, yeah.
You're right,
That just depends how the Prairie guys, how well they labeled them.
Oh, no access.
All right.
That ain't you up there, is it? What is that?
That's a bridge.
Oh, that's one of us?
Yep. I believe that's being used for one of the exterior room controllers. That's switching some exterior lights. So that'll be under the Sector F exterior zone. Yep.
Right there, Alex.
Yeah.
Sticking out like a flag. It's waving at you when you walk in.
Yeah. And the quick way to tell that's a bridge is 1, it's blue, and then 2, it's only got 3 ports instead of 4. And yeah, I don't know if actually, I mean, you can take a look and probably see those LEDs all working how I described earlier.
Oh, yep.
Yep, you got your
Got some red, got some blue, got some greens.
got the blue flashing, green
Yeah,
is telling you the network's going through, and then the red that's kind of buried in on the right
With
near
the, right next to the blue one.
yeah, that's telling you that it's talking to the room controller.
Which does this go on? That's upstairs somewhere?
I think it's just in the electrical room, just right across here.
So what is the PoE power? What is the power?
It's so the bridges, they get power from the room controller typically to operate.
Okay.
But say you turn off a circuit and that room controller loses power, that bridge will grab power from the 2 bridges before it. So this thing, it does put out power on those cables, but it's not really its biggest purpose. Its biggest purpose is just splitting the network up and then being like a network switch so that you can take those different runs and interface it all back into one backbone.
But the bridges are what links everything together.
Yeah, yep.
Does the bridge, or the PoE, does it connect into the bridge? The purple wire?
Right, so like the first bridge in the line is going to go back to this PoE, and then it's going to jump down to all the next bridges.
Okay.
Yeah, and these are like, I guess you could say like dumb network switches where like the area controller can't tell the difference of what PoE or what port it's plugged into. It's just one network
Okay.
of everything talking to each other. Oh yeah, looks like that's pretty jammed up in there. Yeah. So you see that little black thing on the wall?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's the laser that's pointing over to the reflector on the left. And so when that's open, it should be controlling both sides. And a common thing, like if that laser gets just a little bit misaligned and it's not hitting the reflector, it's going to think that it's being blocked. It's got to make it
Is it
back.
visible where you can adjust
Yeah,
it?
it's a red. You can
Somebody
see.
had the code on it or something.
Yeah. I was actually like trying to dial it in. And I was just following it on my hand, like over to the reflector,
Okay.
and trying to get it lined up. So yep, we got another daylight zone over here.
Is that motion up there, is that for security?
Those, I believe those are security.
That's not one.
That's not one of the wall
There you
mounts.
go. The
No.
wall's open, and the switch turns on lights on both sides.
Yep. Very good. Yeah, so like these lights are all dimmed out right now because you got that photocell picking up a pretty good amount of light.
Oh,
Yep. Those little,
there's actually two there, huh?
yep. It really, I think, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think it's just programmed on one of them because they're so close to each other. They're going to pick up the same amount of light.
Yeah.
There's a, sometimes there'll be just kind of oddities like that in the design of, why
Instead of one in the
they put
middle, they
two
put
for no
two, yeah.
reason. Yeah. Oh, yep. Another, I guess, just kind of random note. I've got all the corridors. Their dimming is around somewhere around 60%. Some of them are closer to 70, but they're not actually at their full brightness. And because we don't really need the full brightness to get the amount of light level that they specified, so it'll just make the fixtures last a lot longer and less energy use. Let's see. Oh, and also on dimming. Just about everywhere in the building, all the trim on all the dimmers is set to 9 out of 10 volts. So on the dimmer, when it says 100, it's actually not at 100, it's at 90. And that's so that like 10 years down the road or however long when the fixtures, the LEDs start to wear out, you'll have that little extra like boost to bring them back up.
Okay.
Yep.
You said there was stuff in the stairwell? One of them.
Yeah, I mean this is I guess, yeah, one of the stairwell areas.
Got one there.
There's stairwells also in like that part of the hallway on this wing and then that wing.
So with motion here, there's probably one up there, the top,
Yeah.
stairs.
For this is kind of unique, like this specific area in E, and these fixtures are actually just working with the corridor, like the corridor area. If you go to like the actual, the stairwells over here, it's an enclosed stairwell, so that's working as its own zone. But yeah, this fixture is just with the rest of this.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah, there's not any lights up there until you get to the top.
Well, that.
Yeah, they got that little
halfway
one.
landing one.
Yeah, that'll be doing a little bit.
At least you can get to it.
Yeah.
Not like a helo.
Yeah, no kidding.
Things falling out there. Just another little piece of info. A lot of the classrooms have these little awning things. I've found that like on these sunny days, they will reflect a ton of light into the photocell. So I've had those calibrations set like pretty high. So you need a lot of light hitting that photocell for it to start dimming them down because the photocell will be getting a lot of light, but there's not actually like a lot of light lighting up the classroom. So it's actually something that came up on one of the commissioning checklists is they thought the lights weren't dimming, but they just probably didn't use a strong enough flashlight on there because it's set so high.